Scott Robertson is gone as All Blacks coach. The second time the All Blacks have ever fired a head coach. Admittedly, one of them, John Mitchell, after the 2003 World Cup, was a pretty clear one. This is the first time they've ever fired them mid-cycle.
Yeah, it's wild, isn't it?
Yeah.
Because it's interesting the perspective we have from the Northern Hemisphere looking over there. We probably wouldn't have thought that the All Blacks under Robertson was going disastrously, but obviously...
As Welsh fans, it's hard to look at anyone going disastrously and go...
Fair point.
Yeah.
In New Zealand, the way that they view the All Blacks is they have to be the top of the tree every single time. Like, they don't accept big... The All Blacks are probably like the third best team in the world right now, I think it's safe to say. And
fourth, somewhere around there.
For a lot of people in New Zealand, that's not acceptable. That's not good enough. It's not what they're used to.
Yeah, so we're in the situation where, I should clarify, I mean professional era. Wayne Smith also applied to remain on as head coach and wasn't selected, but that was the end of his contract. Every All Blacks coach has left at the end of their contract, right, which is normally the end of World Cups. Scott Robertson was contracted for 4 years, and they've let him go early. David Kirk, the chairperson of the NZIU at the minute, said that they didn't feel it was a mistake to offer him 4 years because it allowed him to plan for that eventuality. However, the point was very much made. This decision has been made pretty much entirely because they felt they were not on track to win the 2027 World Cup. And the thing is, I think that is fair, right?
Yeah.
That is the goal of every All Blacks coach, is to win every World Cup they enter. And that has always been the case right back to the first World Cup, which they did win in New Zealand in '87, when David Kirk himself was the captain. So he knows all about this.
Look, we recently did our World Cup checking, and our whole kind of narrative was the Springboks are nailed-on favourites.
Yeah. The second contender was England.
Yes.
Right? Like, it wasn't even New Zealand there's a decent chance, but...
Yes. So when David Kirk was asked, is it a risk to fire Scott Robertson at this point? He said, I don't feel it is. I feel it would be more of a risk to stay where we are and to just keep going. And I get his point around that. As much as I do think it's a risk. Obviously, it's a very brave thing to do. But if you were asked right now, gun to your head, are the All Blacks going to win the 2027 Men's World Cup? You would say no.
You say no, yeah. It's possible. It's there. It was something that could happen under Scott Robertson. But I think the thing this reminds me of, and this is a very stark comparison considering how it worked out in the end, but is Australia firing Dave Rennie and bringing Eddie Jones a year before the 2023 World Cup, right? And that was a roll of dice. That was, we will go to this World Cup, we will perform, we'll get out of the group, and you know what, we might win the quarterfinal depending on how the draw goes, but most likely we're looking at quarterfinals, maybe semi-finals. We haven't got a shot in hell at winning it. And Eddie came in and went, I've got a plan. I know how we can win this. I've got a style of rugby that's almost working with England. I can get Australia playing that in a year. And if we do that, we can win the World Cup. And the thing is, right, if he had got that style of play working, they probably would have won that World Cup. The problem was he couldn't, and he did a terrible job.
It was the most ambitious style of rugby to try and teach somebody in 8 months.
He was over-ambitious. He managed the squad incredibly badly, like really bad man manager. None of the squad liked him.
Terrible relationships with the boys.
You know, was trying to teach them other game plans alongside so they could play them in the meantime. It became a whole catastrophe.
It was a mess,
right? He was trying to do that in essentially 7 months. Whoever comes in here will have 18 months before the World Cup. Slightly less than that because the first game is in June and the World Cup begins 1st of October 2027. So there is just more than a year to do that. But very much that decision from Australia, right, was, okay, we could take a shot of a guy who might get us knocked out in the pool stage, but he's more likely to win the World Cup than Dave Rennie was. But at the same time, you are gambling with a much, much higher chance of going out in the quarters, right?
Yeah.
And Scott Robertson, I think, would safely guide New Zealand to that quarterfinal against the Springboks, and then you'd give them maybe a 1 in 4 chance of winning that?
Sure,
you know?
sure.
Which is as high as anyone has against the Springboks right now, but that is not good enough for New Zealand rugby. What they want is to be winning that World Cup, and anything less than a final is a failure, I think.
Yeah. So, with all of this in mind, obviously we were about to do something reflecting on where the All Blacks are at the moment, because they've not been playing in the style of rugby that you traditionally associate with the All Blacks in terms of, you know, offloading an organisation and all
yet
of that
I think they're trying to.
Yeah.
And I think this was the thing that brought up a number of times over the autumn, and we wanted to deep dive into. The plan was we're going to start working on it now so that we can put it out in June, and thankfully they've spared us having to do that now. But essentially, I think the All Blacks were going through an identity crisis. I think they're in a situation where they'd naturally built up, and it was similar to what Scott Robertson did with Jason Ryan alongside him at the Crusaders, which was build the most conservative team in Super Rugby.
Yes.
And They won that competition, and people remember Richie Mo'unga producing endless moments of magic, and critical that Robertson's been fired before he could bring Mo'unga out.
Yeah, that's a name we'll come back to later in this video, no doubt.
That's a really intriguing thing. It's like, would this have all looked different if he got Mo'unga in to be his 10? Because that 10 prop position was a bit of a problem for New Zealand. Like, we'll get into, I really rated how Beauden Barrett was playing, but like he wasn't the 10 they wanted in that position, I think.
And a lot of the things Beauden Barrett was doing, he could have done from the 15 shirt as well.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Same with David McKenzie when he was there. Like, that 10 position had become a bit of an issue. But I felt like fundamentally the Crusaders under Scott Robertson were a very conservative team. They had the best maul, the best pack, the best scrum in Super Rugby by a distance. They were incredibly well drilled by Jason Ryan. They had a very good core forward pack. And they rode that to titles, and they rode that to most of their wins. And occasionally, you would see the likes of Will Jordan pop up a handful of times a game and break open because their team were on the front foot. Yeah. And two things happened here, right? One is that forward pack were not as good relatively at international level as they were at club level, right, where they could roll over Super Rugby, where the focus is far more on attacking rugby than the sort of rugby that they prioritise there. So they didn't get the foundation, the basics of we are steamrolling people so we can open things up wider because we've got endless front football. Sort of thing the Springboks are working with really well now. We might get onto that in a second. But the other side of this, right, is that, okay, instead what they built was a team who got parity with anyone, who were incredibly sensible and robust, but then couldn't open it up wider because they weren't getting that in the front football, and they didn't have necessarily the structures to play a kind of either an island-style system, which is very regimented, but a lot of passes, a lot of kind of drawing people in to open them up, or a France-style system, which is so open and just relies purely on talent.
And I think in terms of the All Blacks kicking game, they were kind of going somewhere in the middle of those two examples that you've just mentioned, where the All Blacks, and I think a lot of people kind of had a hard time accepting this in the last 18 months, and understandably, because we've never really seen an All Black team, certainly in the professional era, that's been like this, if ever, where they are primarily a kicking team and a set-piece oriented team who will wind down their opposition until they can get into the position where they can do those the sort of fancy stuff that we're used to the All Blacks doing, as you say, that regimented stuff that at the moment we're associating with Ireland, where they go for a lot of short passes. And at the moment they were playing a version of that wasn't quite clicking. At times it was, and you would find tries like the one Will Jordan scored against England, where it looks so incredibly easy. And I think that's the sort of team that Razor's All Blacks like to be. Is like you can give them stuff for cheap and they will score 5 pointers for cheap, where you don't feel like you're under the sticks thinking they didn't really work for that, lads. But actually they have, because they've ground you down both physically and mentally through their set piece and through their kicking game. And it didn't entirely click over an 80-minute period, but we will never know now whether it was all this great master plan to build to the World Cup and they would have perfected it by then. We will never know.
So David Kirk kept coming back to this, and he made the point that, I know I keep saying this word a lot, but trajectory. And he said the thing that they looked at wasn't necessarily the results. It wasn't the fact the All Blacks lost 3 games last year, which is fine. You know, they lost to England, they lost to Argentina away from home, and they lost to South Africa at home, which was the heavy.
And they got battered. Yeah.
But that's fine. That South Africa team are miles ahead of everyone else. That England team are as good as anyone else. And Argentina will produce that every now and again. You know, it's just who they are. Those 3 losses, I think, are fine. And they're very much like, this isn't... David Cook was very clear to say this isn't setting a precedent of 3 losses and you're fired. Like, he doesn't want that to be what they lay out for the next coach and anyone beyond that. But instead, there was no clear trajectory if they've improved in these key areas over the course of the year, that they are moving closer to winning World Cup, that it very much felt like they'd remained static over the course of the year. And I think that's true. I don't think the All Blacks were better at the end of 2025 than they were at the start.
Yeah, I think that's fair.
And what we saw was a team who had grand ideas about how they wanted to play, were good at different things because of how they were being drilled and what the coaches were naturally kind of encouraging in them. And that led to this team feeling like it was an identity crisis, feeling like it didn't really know what it was doing. So naturally they were a kicking team, but they spent most of the time running the ball pointlessly, or they'd be in situations where they could run and they're like, okay, no, but kicking is our primary game plan, so we're doing that. And it just felt like the whole thing didn't knit together, and it needed someone with a kind of stronger vision to come in and go, either Razor just needed to go, okay, no, I'm committing to being a kicking team, or they needed someone else to come in, either an attack coach alongside him, or, as we're now going to see, a head coach, to come in and go, no, we're going to ignore that and we're going to lean into being the traditional All Black DNA. Yeah,
and that's it. Part of the attack coach's job is to kind of set the precedent of when we kick, when we play really sensibly, so these opportunities open up. Because we are now in a phase of rugby where attacking and kicking games are codependent on each other,
Yeah.
because it's all about manipulating what space the opposition wingers are stood in, or whoever they put in the backfield, sometimes the 10, the fullback, whoever it is. But let's say the wingers, for the sake of this, where they are stood. If you get them into the backfield because you're kicking so much, you can then go crossfield kick, as Bowden Barrett loves to do.
Yeah.
You know, if you keep them in the front line, you can hit those 50-22s and you can turn them and you can play a territory-based game.
Yeah.
And I think the All Blacks, as you say, sometimes they were in that position where they thought, let's chance our arm and attack a little bit more because we are the mighty All Blacks. It's what we are good at as a nation. And they are, and they always will be, they always have been.
We did a big deep dive into Scott Robertson's Crusaders right before his first game in charge of New Zealand, where they beat England, but quite narrowly. And I think a lot of people are like, okay, there's patches here. We did a big deep dive where I talked about the fact that Scott Robertson is the first ever auteur coach, I say, to come in to this All Black system. Like a coach who has certain ideas and philosophies on the game, you know, kind of French word for author, like someone who comes in and goes, no, we play in this style, we do this. You look at, you know, Eddie Jones, a little bit. You look at Warren Gatland, both of those possibly available for this job, Gatland certainly. But those guys who go, no, I have a solid play that I encourage and I play, and I want you playing that way, right? And everyone else that's ever coached the All Blacks since Brian Lahore in '87 kind of turned that template around and reinvented essentially what had happened in 1905 when that original All Black team came over, and you went like, okay, let's take that game plan and modernise it for the 80s, and that's since been modernised again and again and again by a succession of coaches who've basically taken that game plan and adapted it every few years, right? And that was the way, right the way through, when you look at, you know, Wayne Smith, John Mitchell, into Graham Henry, into Steve Hansen, into Ian Foster, all of them had worked with the previous load of coaches, all of them had experience with them. The only exception is kind of
John
Mitchell,
DNA that they
played
stuck to.
under them, and had then brought that system in and learnt that and played with that. He was the only one that hadn't been an assistant coach, basically, and climbed up the ranks or worked alongside them, you know, at another nation, as Graham Henry and Steve Hansen had before and so on. So they had a clear DNA, right? And all of them played the same system. All of them played versions of the same game plan, and it just evolved it and tweaked it, and it was very much the All Black style of play. Razor came in, and his Crusaders team did not play that way. And the thing was at the time, like, oh, this team's been so dominant under this guy. Fascinating what it's going to be like to see an All Blacks team that plays differently. And in the end, it was an All Blacks team that wasn't sure whether it should play differently or whether it should play the same way, because they're the All Blacks, right? And I think this was a massive learning lesson that David Kirk said he's not going to rule out an overseas coach coming in. I don't think you can do that.
Yeah.
I think this is a lesson that has to be learnt permanently, which is basically the All Blacks need to be coached by a Kiwi who understands this system, right? Like, and there will be plenty of Kiwis who coach a different way, such as Warren Gatland, right? Who plays a much more conservative, kind of effort-based rather than skill-based necessarily style of play. That's fine. What they need is someone who gets this system. And I think we'll get on to contenders at the minute, but like, when you nail down the handful, they're all coaches who, yes, they've done it overseas, yes, they haven't necessarily been in the system, but they play a similar style of rugby and they know how to execute it.
The other thing, we've talked a lot about that power game, that kicking game.
Yeah.
That was a huge part of the Crusaders' success in Super Rugby, and was a part of what I think Razor wanted the All Blacks to be. The other part of it, and you touched upon it earlier, was in terms of the attack. Because if you look at just the highlight reel of that Crusaders team, you will see like, oh my God, they score some like, incredible tries. They get Will Jordan's hands on the ball all the time. And the key ingredient was Richie Mo'unga.
Yeah.
And we did a separate video about Richie Mo'unga when he announced he was going to come back to New Zealand to play for the All Blacks again for the 2027 World Cup. And that is kind of the missing piece in all of this, that we will never know what the Razor All Blacks, like how heavily he was potentially relying on Mo'unga. That, you know, every game Mo'unga was available, he would try and play him in that Crusaders team. And like when he wasn't playing, he would try and put the same ideals of Mo'unga onto, you know, the Mitch Drum and Mitch Hunts, these other players who would like be game managers in that team. And like David Havili to an extent as well, playing at 12, that he would try and just make sure everything was around, like try and pretend to be Mo'unga. Now, when Mo'unga went AWOL for 2-3 years, went to Japan, he couldn't force that on Bowden Barrett. He couldn't force that on Damien McKenzie because they are different players who are established at international level.
Bowden Barrett, incredible reader of a game, but is not that style of player, right? Like the Richie Mo'unga style of play, like a lot of it comes back to even small things like how he catches the ball. Like Mo'unga catches the ball and it's straight in and out of his hands. Bowden Barrett catches the ball and then makes a decision, right? And sometimes that is kicking, sometimes that is passing, sometimes it's going himself. But like all the same, he fundamentally, like the ball moves through him, like it flows through him in a different way, and that changes how your whole team works.
I feel like Bowden Barrett nowadays, like as a foil to Richie Mo'unga would be perfect. Like that would be so good for that back line. But again, like that's something we won't see. Of course, another essential part of this is regarding the rest of the coaching staff. Now, David Kirk said in his release that they haven't fired the rest of the coaching staff. However, whoever the successor to Razor is will come in and decide what he wants to do with that coaching staff.
If they want to bring in their own coaching staff to replace them, they're welcome to do that.
Yes. So, can we safely say Jason Ryan is probably safe?
Most likely.
I think he's arguably the best kind of like forward set piece, like maul coach there is.
Scott Hansen, gone.
Yes.
Because this comes back to another key area here, which is that this is, by all accounts, including from the NZU themselves, player-led.
Yes.
Right? So Scott Robertson's job, from what we hear, was not particularly under threat. And they were like, okay, it's not been brilliant, but we'll give you another year. We'll give you some more time. And then they conduct a full review on the year, as they do every year. This was led by David Kirk himself and Kevin Mialamu, rather than, and then they brought in a consultant as well alongside, rather than the performance team within the NZRU. They spoke to, now, David Kirk said almost 20 players, which means 18. Like, they spoke to 18 players.
Everyone with 20 caps or more.
Yeah, if you look at that All Black squad from the autumn, right, that played on the tour of Europe, there are 13 players with 30 or more caps there.
There you go.
So it's those players plus a handful of, the likes of Cam Roygaard, plus the likes of Wallace Atiti, guys who might not have the number of caps yet, but look set to be in All Blacks for a long, long time to come.
They'll stick around.
Yeah. So it's probably those group of players they spoke to, and they said there wasn't a unanimous agreement. It wasn't like everyone wants Razor gone or this is something that's a problem occurring. What it was they consistently got feedback saying, I don't feel like we're moving forwards. And when they spoke up the players' ambitions, they felt that they weren't going to be met in the current environment. Ardi Sarvea was the loudest amongst these.
Yeah, he's the only player who's been named personally, who was definitely one of these. You can probably fill in the blanks of who the other, let's say, 17 of them are.
Kirk did say, I want to make it clear that Ardi didn't lead this. This wasn't like a revolt led by him. He also said, the phrase player power was thrown at him, which, in Wales, a very familiar phrase. You think of like 2005 and Mike Ruddock being outed through player power was the phrase used then. Gareth Thomas ending up on scrum 5 and trying to, getting into fights with everyone left, right and centre because he didn't like the coach. He fell out with the coach, the world captain at the time. The quote was, this is mature and appropriate listening to players and not player power. David Kirk was very clear on that, but this was led by players and the other members of staff.
Yes. David Kirk also said he was surprised by how intelligent the players were, which is quite funny.
Yeah,
but
as a former player himself.
Yeah, I think there's been a lot of very easy headlines around particularly Ardi Sarvea within all of this. And reading into what Kirk said, my interpretation, and again, that will be different from everybody else's, is that instead of saying like, oh, I hate Razor Robertson's guts, get him gone, which is the easy headline to get, he kind of said, I think there are bits of this X, Y, and Z that Razor's doing a great job on, but if we don't fix X, Y, and Z, which will require a lot of fixing, we won't win the World Cup. Yeah. And these are the bits that I'm concerned about. And other players within the All Blacks squad basically went, yeah, what Ardi said.
Yeah, I think he mentioned a few players' ambitions and how he felt that they weren't being met. And I think that means universally across the squad, they were going, we aren't currently on track to beat South Africa in a World Cup quarterfinal.
Yes.
We aren't on track to be better than England at that World Cup. And at that point, if you're third in the world, if you're fourth in the world, if France picks back up again once Dupont's back, that becomes a bit of an issue for New Zealand, especially when you've got to meet South Africa along the way to reach the semi-finals. So I think ultimately this is a massive gamble, but it's one I completely understand and I don't disagree with.
Yeah, as much as Kirk says it's a bigger gamble to keep him, like this is obviously a gamble. Yeah. But so here's some stats for you.
Yeah.
So New Zealand under Razor, so this World Cup cycle, they have won 20 games out of 27.
Yeah.
So that's a 74% win rate.
0 draws.
So I've checked on this for a bit of context. That's higher than any of the Six Nations teams. So Ireland are sitting around 72%, so they're very close.
Since last World Cup.
Since, in this World Cup cycle. And England are sitting around 66%.
Now, it is worth saying those teams play each other all the time and are much more level across the board.
Very true.
Where
New Zealand plays South Africa
twice a year, but then they will beat Australia twice, and Argentina, obviously they've lost a couple of games too, but you know.
But I just think that's really interesting that is how kind of, I guess, high the bar is for a New Zealand rugby coach. And as you say, David Cook did say, if you lose 3 games in a year, it doesn't mean you're necessarily straight out. But
Ian Foster's win rate was 69.6%.
Nice.
Which is the lowest of any All Blacks head coach in the professional era.
Yeah.
But the first All Blacks coach had a 0% win rate. They lost the first 4 games. But then that was an unsanctioned tour before the original. There's a whole other thing. Anyway, but like, honestly, that 74% Razor win rate is slap bang in the middle of All Black win rates, right? So like John Hart in the professional era, 75%. Wayne Smith was only in charge for a year, but 70%, 71%. John Mitchell, thought of as a joke, 82%, but lost a semi-final, so was out, was gone. Then Henry, 85%, Hansen, 86%. Like, generally, 75% is the lower end of acceptable.
As far as I can tell, the only 2 men's teams in that international level in that cycle, in the Razor era, who have a higher percentage are South Africa and Zimbabwe, who have a higher than 75% win rate, which is, again, it's an extremely high thing to go. But once again, it just tells you everything you need to know, doesn't it? They will accept winning a World Cup and nothing else.
Yeah, they're almost as good as Zimbabwe, and they should be happy with that.
Yeah.
So this raises a few questions, right? The player revolt thing is interesting. And again, it's very clear it's not a player revolt, it's player feedback.
Yes.
But what can one man coming in feasibly change? Is this a player-led thing in terms of what happens next? But the bigger question is who comes in next? So there are all sorts of rumours out there at the minute. I've heard several rumours from several places that this is done and this is what's happening. All of those rumours point to it being Jamie Joseph who's coming in.
So he seems the front runner at this point.
He seems the front runner. Now, David Kirk was pretty clear that they haven't appointed anyone yet. He said they haven't interviewed yet. They've started to send out kind of invitations, I guess, to who they want to interview and who they're going to speak to.
And it's a chance that someone's just heard Jamie Joseph has had that invite and ran with that.
And it's possible Jamie Joseph was the first person they called. I went, are you interested in this job? Because we want to hear from you.
Yeah.
There's a few sides of this. So Jamie Joseph obviously was head coach of the Highlanders, won Super Rugby, then went to Japan, led them to the 2019 World Cup where they did brilliant things, beat Scotland, beat Ireland, and got out of the group for the first time ever.
Won their pool, yeah.
Yeah, and possibly could have beaten anyone other than the Springboks where they just got steamrolled, which is a shame.
No scrum, no win.
Yeah, and in the next few years, continued on with Japan, then left after the 23 World Cup, which was a bit of a disappointment for them.
Yeah. When you factor in the really basic version of what we were saying earlier about the All Black way of playing...
Oh, also we're saying has gone back to the Highlanders and done very good things.
Yes,
very
and
good
really
things.
highly thought of. When you think of the All Black way in terms of 1-3-2-2, most likely pattern they'll play in terms of spreading their forwards across the pitch, short little passes and offloads, getting their pack playing like centres across the board. You look at that Japanese
team to encourage teams to kick it back to you.
Yeah, focus on counter-attack more than set piece. Also having a good set piece where there's a launch pad more than anything. But you look at that Japanese team and also that Highlanders team, they were both known for all of the above.
Yeah,
you know?
Exactly. Like, yes, he didn't come through coaching under Graham Henry or Steve Hansen, but he has grown up, I think, in the New Zealand rugby kind of ecosystem, playing a similar style of play.
Yes.
And his Japan team were more innovative because they had to work with a smaller pack and they had to change more things. But you look at him with the Highlanders and across the board, wherever he's gone, it's always been, we play high-tempo rugby, we're skills first, our forwards are incredibly skillful. And yes, there are tweaks he made with Japan that he probably wouldn't make with New Zealand or other things he would further change the All Blacks. I think he's a really good fit. And I honestly think he probably stands a better chance of winning that game against South Africa in that quarter-final than Razor Robertson style of play would.
I back it.
Even though I think there's a chance the game leans even harder into kicking tactics, as it started to over the last 6 months by the World Cup, and that becomes the dominant style of play, are you going to beat the Springboks playing their game, right?
Yeah.
Which is what essentially the Razor system, if it was really going to work, was going to lean into, is we are South Africa, but with a little bit of France.
Yeah,
with a little bit of like
They're
bullshit.
degrees of that, aren't they?
Yeah.
I definitely feel
like actually just being New Zealand is probably a better way to win that game.
I feel like Jamie Joseph's the most and this is a bullshit point, but like the most classic All Black coach.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like he's the most in line with Graham Henry, Steve Hansen, Fozzie.
Yeah.
So like he's the least kind of left field pick, the one's going to talk about. But there is an elephant in the room with regards to Jamie Joseph.
Yes. So Jamie Joseph has worked for a long time for most of the last decade, alongside one particular assistant.
Yeah.
His favourite special boy, Tony Brown.
So those two are like a double act.
Yeah.
In
Jamie Joseph's the head coach. Tony Brown, rather, is the attack coach.
Yeah.
I almost forgot another name that might come into the hat there.
Yeah, we'll come on to him. But again, the reason why, so Tony Brown, he's the current Springbok attack coach, and he has done wonders. Yes. Obviously, he's working with the best set of players in the world and the best set of coaches in the world.
And the best set of forwards, right?
Yes.
The infinite gain line ball.
Yes. So you have to factor that in, that like it's a different challenge to what he faced when he was coaching Japan. But again, we talked about that 1-3-2-2 Japanese attack. There is a chance that if Jamie Joseph wants to play that style of rugby, he would need Tony Brown to come with him. Tony Brown is, we think, contracted through to the World Cup with South Africa. It is extremely unclear to the public whether or not there are clauses in there that the NZRU might just go, we're going to throw every penny we can at getting Tony Brown in, which would throw a real spanner in the works. Not only getting in probably the form attack coach in the world, well, I guess probably the best attack coach in the world, so to say, but also taking a rook out of that South African chessboard, you know.
There is nobody the Springboks could appoint that is not currently under contract somewhere and feasibly would want to go and do that. I mean, there's a chance that everyone goes, okay, I'd love to win a World Cup with that group of players. I want to work with that group of players, right?
Yeah.
But this could be such a blow for South Africa. It's almost as big a blow for South Africa as it is a gain for New Zealand if they get him.
Yeah.
There's a whole other conversation that will come to down the line if it happens. But
the only person I can think of who would replace him and do a good job is Kevin Murray.
Who's the current Canada women's head coach. But also unproven in men's rugby. Yeah. And
it'd be a huge gamble.
Yeah, it'd be a gamble. So, and also, you know, native French speaker, like, is he going to work as well with that group of players, South African players, doesn't know that culture? The whole other conversation.
Gamble.
I also think the only way Tony Brown is leaving that Springbok job is to go and work for his nation, the nation he played for, with his mate, who he's worked with for years, with Jamie Joseph. And I think there's a chance he just goes, no, sorry, like, I want to coach the All Blacks.
Yeah, I'm in the middle of something here.
Yeah. And I think there's a decent chance that, I think it's the only job Tony Brown would leave it for. But I think that blows everything wide open if they get him, if he comes in.
This is nothing but a rumour.
This is nothing but a rumour.
It's just hearsay, Chinese whispers at this point, the Tony Brown thing.
There's plenty of rumours I've heard in different places of this, or of just Jamie Joseph done, he's going to look at that later.
Yeah.
But the attack coach is fairly open, like, they're going to need a new one. So we'll see how that goes down. There's a few other names in contention.
Yeah.
One of them, Vern Cotter, former Scotland coach. Again, very highly
Fiji.
thought of. Yeah, in Fiji.
Claremont as well.
Absolute hard bastard, nuggety. Will get them playing almost like... We're talking about Razor not having the kind of wherewithal to force them to play the style of play that they're naturally kind of leaning into under him.
Yeah.
Vern Cotter wouldn't have that problem.
Yeah.
Right?
Currently, the Blues has done a really, really good job with them. He's really highly thought of.
They won Super Rugby under him.
Yeah.
He would get them playing a style of rugby that is more conservative, but probably actually leans into the things they've been good at over the last year, much better than Razor did.
Yeah.
So I think he's an interesting shout. He's an interesting name in the mix. I think it's possible. I'm not expecting it.
Similarly, so the current Super Rugby champions are the Crusaders.
Yeah.
Under the leadership of Rob Penny.
Yes.
What do we think to that?
No.
I just can't see it. I can't really explain why. I just can't see it.
In the same way that I kind of don't take Les Kiss seriously as international coach, and a little bit of that is history, you know, but like if your teams have faltered enough in the past, as they have for both of them, you know, where they've had well set up teams that haven't performed to the expectations, even if you have one team as, you know, Crusaders won Super Rugby this year, Rob Penny did a much improved job in the previous year, but there have been plenty of times with him as a coach over, you know, right back to a time of Munster when I first kind of became aware of him, where his teams have consistently underperformed.
Yeah.
So do you want that track record when you're taking a gamble to win the World Cup?
That's it. They've taken one gamble already.
Yeah,
I think he'd be doubling down on that. So
the only way he gets it is if it's like a split ballot, like it's an Ed Miliband situation for a very British reference, where like he's everyone's second choice, you know, and he ends up getting in on that.
So one of the other kind of big names, you slightly alluded to him earlier. It's fascinating. There's a cycle that seems to happen in New Zealand rugby where Wayne Smith goes, you know what? I've done my bit.
I'm out.
I'm going to put my feet up and have an easy life. I'm retiring once and for all. And then 3 years pass by and New Zealand rugby needs saving. And he goes, right, I'm the only person who can do this.
Has the energy of someone who has several pairs of slippers but has a favourite.
Yeah.
And sometimes when the toast comes out, the toaster goes, oh, yes. He has the energy of a man who wants to be retired. And yet, he is also maybe the greatest rugby coaching mind in history.
Agreed. He's the Lord and Saviour of New Zealand rugby. Like,
yeah.
He's the only person to ever won both the Men's and Women's World Cup.
Did it with the Black Ferns a few years ago. Interesting that both New Zealand teams, men's and women's, are looking at new coaches for the next game. Obviously, with Whitney Hansen coming in as the Black Ferns head coach. So that is interesting as another angle. Wayne Smith is a possibility. I think there's more likely you end up doing something like they did with him in the autumn, in the kind of November window, where he comes in as a consultant above everyone else, where they bring him into a kind of DOR type role, or as a, you just have a look at everything and tweak things kind of job.
I think if they need an interim coach, because, say, somebody is contracted for another 6 months in another rivaling job and then might come back to New Zealand and might be free, then I think he would be the man, wouldn't he?
Well, so David Cook was very clear, as soon as possible, they're going to get this sorted and appointed.
Okay.
They want them appointed inside the next month, I think, as fast as they can. So you refer to the other contender for the job. I think Jamie Joseph is front runner, which would be crazy, which would be great. I think he'd be a very good appointment.
Yes.
There's one other person I think would do a brilliant job, and that is Joe Schmidt.
Yeah. My first thought when I looked at Razor getting sacked was like, I bet Schmidt's fuming now.
Yeah.
Because ever since he was in the Ireland job, it seemed quite clear to the onlooker that his dream job, like he has just wanted to be the All Blacks head coach. And obviously he then settled for being the attack coach, did a very good job there, got to the World Cup final with them, has since gone to the Wallabies and has been brilliant. He's just been what they needed, And
that is also true of another coach who is also very valuable, which is Warren Gatland.
Yeah, we're not going to give him any more airtime.
If this was 2019, maybe he'd be in contention, maybe this come up. You cannot put him now.
No, absolutely not. Especially because when he went back to the Chiefs, he was so laughed upon and just.
But I bet he'll send a CV in.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Of course he will. Of course he will. You miss 100% of the shots you don't take. Don't you?
Rob Howley, All Blacks attack coach.
Yeah. Yeah. No thanks. But yeah, Joe Schmidt. Again, he has been so wanted by the Wallabies that they've been kind of. He was meant to leave bloody ages ago, and then they've been keeping him on one rotating 6-month contracts ever since. It is believed that he's going to do sort of 6 more months to oversee the start of the Les Kiss era, and then he's going to dip back home because he needs to be in New Zealand with his family.
Yeah, because he won't actually be involved in camps over the next few months, right? So he will be there whenever they need a camp, which will be at most a handful of 3 or 4 days at a time. Where he'll fly back to Australia, he'll watch some of Super Rugby, and then he'll oversee that first kind of camp period with Les Kiss.
Yes.
And then Les Kiss will take over for the rest of the year.
Yeah. But, I don't know, I looked at that and kind of thought, this is really bad timing for Joe, because, if he'd chosen, right, I'm fully done, there's no buyout, whatever, no buyout needed, I would just go and coach the All Blacks. And he does feel like an extremely straightforward person. He's been in the environment before. He presumably has good relationships with
He made a
players.
huge impact in 23 when he came in and essentially ran the attack and ran half of the game.
Again, he was what they needed.
Yeah.
And he might be now.
He would be an inspired choice.
Yeah.
I think he'd do a very good job. Again, the thing comes back to personal reasons. And the reason he isn't staying with Australia, where I think he kind of probably would have wanted to, had this not been the case, is his son's health.
Yes.
And his son has been seriously ill over the last few years. He does a lot of work, both with him looking after him, but also a lot of charity work and other work involved in that kind of side of things. And that has dictated and ran his life for a long time, as it should.
Yes, correct.
Rightly, and
absolutely.
Amazing
Good
of
for
him to do that.
Extremely admirable of him. But there's also a part of me that wonders whether the New Zealand rugby faithful would look at him and go, no, he's just been with our arch rivals, the Wallabies. We don't want him,
Yeah, I don't think that would be too big a factor.
Yeah, I think it will split some people, but I don't think it's at the forefront of David Kirk's mind when he's doing these interviews.
Are there any overseas coaches you can see taking the job?
I don't think they'll do it.
No.
Certainly not this close out to a World Cup.
I think the only name you could put in the hat, I mean, Eddie's not a million miles away, but Eddie's with Japan and no one's taking that gamble again. No one's doing that again.
Yeah, and Rassi's not going anywhere.
Literally the only name that comes up is Rona Gara.
Oh, that would be fascinating.
Now, La Rochelle have dipped a bit the last 18 months. They've fallen off a little bit. They looked good at the weekend against Leinster. There's some real return of form, but also they got absolutely trounced by Toulouse a few weeks ago, right? He worked in the New Zealand system. He worked in the Crusaders.
Yeah.
Likewise, Mark Jones, who's doing a good job with the Ospreys so far, was also brought through that New Zealand system. So you've got 2 overseas coaches there who've had experience in this. I think that's the only way this goes elsewhere, is people who worked
who've
in
done
New
Super
Zealand,
Rugby and
who've
succeeded
done that,
at
who've
Super
worked in
Rugby
that
level.
system. At the same time, who do they work under? Scott Robertson, the pair of them. So you probably rule them out. I don't think they will take a foreigner.
I think O'Gara, again, similar
I think
to
if they draw up a list of 20 coaches, O'Gara's on it. I think realistically he's not going to be interviewed. He's not going to be.
I agree. I think similar to what we're saying about Rob Penny, it's like that's a risk on top of a risk.
Yes.
Going for someone like that.
Also the fact that like O'Gara isn't going to post-match press conference anymore because he gets told off and banned so often from being on the sidelines.
It's very true.
Like because he's causing such a ruckus all the time.
Yeah.
He's such a little rascal, that Rog.
Making more tackles as a coach than he does a fly half.
Yeah.
But that's a conversation for another day.
Hypothetical. I'm going to ask 3 questions, right? New Zealand reached that quarter-final against the Springboks in the next World Cup, right? If Razor is in charge, gut feeling, do you think they win it?
It'd be hilarious if they just went, you know what, we're just going to hire Scott Robertson again. He's the only qualified person we can find. No. Okay.
Bring back Fozzie.
Yeah, if the Razor era carried on. So...
Do you think they would win that game?
Gut instinct, no.
My gut instinct is no. If...
There's obviously a chance.
If Joe Schmidt is in charge... Yes or no, and do you think it's stronger or less chance?
I feel like he could have something up his sleeve. I think a very similar chance, maybe marginally better chance.
I'd say marginally higher. Jamie Joseph's in charge. Okay, Jamie Joseph's in charge without Tony Brown.
Again, I'm going to go marginally better. But yeah.
But I think similar odds without Tony Brown, but Jamie Joseph and Tony Brown together, I would say significantly better odds.
I agree. Because again, like, if Tony Brown did go, like, what would he bring with him from the Springboks?
Exactly. That opens up the whole World Cup. If you can appoint Jamie Joseph to the point of getting Tony Brown...
That's some tea right there,
that opens everything up. So that's exciting. It's a mad day. Fought for Scott Robertson. We can't help but just dive into the possibilities. This was his dream job, something he dreamt of for a very, very long time. Has talked about openly wanting for a long time.
He's also one of my favourite characters in rugby.
Yeah.
I think he's also... Firstly, he just seems like a really great bloke. Shame he never got to break dance as All Blacks head coach, but I guess that's part of the job, isn't it? But also just like... I really admire him in post-match interviews because he talks really technically and openly and earnestly about the game. And when he's not done well enough, he's always stuck his hand up. And I just really respect the guy. Yeah. And there's been talk that Harlequins have already approached him.
Yeah, so
there's slid into his DMs as soon as he
Harlequins going single. After him. The other question I'd raise, right? Newcastle Red Bull. That
would be mental.
They've got cash. Insane. And suddenly, one of the most in-demand coaches in the world becomes available.
That'd be hilarious.
He has, this is a really interesting point from David Kirk, like final thing, right? David Kirk mentions, he's asked, does he have a no-compete clause? Because obviously that didn't happen with Eddie Jones. And Eddie went on and took the Australia job, and that could have easily fired against, very decent chance that England-Australia played in the quarterfinal, and who knows what would have happened there.
Sure.
And he said, yes, he does. And it is most of the top-tier nations, it's certain specific nations Scott Robertson is not allowed to go and work for the next 12 months.
It's not just a blanket thing on everybody in international
It's not you can't coach international rugby, you can't coach T1 international rugby, it's specific teams. So what I'm hearing here is he's available for Wales.
Wales and Italy.
Yeah.
He's probably available
Tandy
for...
out.
Yeah. That would be hilarious and heartbreaking for Steve Tandy.
We did a Dave Rennie.
And
just fired him after
he's available, never mind, you're gone.
You might be the defence coach, Steve.
Yeah. But I do really hope that we see Razor in a top job of some description
and we will.
Soon.
We will.
Just
this
because
is not the end of him.
I think, his style of rugby is incredibly entertaining that he'll bring to teams. He's also just a really unique character in the sport, and we need those.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Okay, Rugby Union, mad day.
Mad day.
We thought putting that box kicking video up, like, nothing else will be happening. Like, it'd be cool to...
We actually penciled in a day off work today, and then the All Blacks sacked the coach, like, right, see you at 10 o'clock.
Never mind. Well, it continues.
It continues.
The plot continues to deepen. Like, so many people fired their coach in the 18 months before the World Cup last time, and it started. It started again.
Congrats, David Kirk, your first one to get someone on the chopping block.